Hello and welcome to Project Volvo. In the previous two videos, we gave the old girl a good clean after 8 years and did a full walk around just to show you how old and crusty this car is. Now we move on to actually doing some of the work on the car, starting with the brakes. Both front calipers are seized, and in this video we're going to be sorting that problem. Started by taking off the wheel, undoing the caliper securing belt, which needed way more force than I would have wanted to put on, and then a few good taps with a hammer to prise the seized caliper off the discs. With the caliper off, took out the old brake pads, which were both really thin and rusty. Now the caliper has two hoses on it, so I had to undo them from the metal brake line, which proves to be very messy, but I was pleased that these came off quite easily. With those done, I could unscrew the brake hoses from the caliper itself, which again I was quite pleased came out really easily. The next goal was to remove the corroded brake hoses from these unions. With a spanner on each end, you simply apply enough force to break the two apart. Unfortunately that didn't go so well on this brake hose, but through the power of editing and some help from Simon from the Volvo workshop, the sheared bolt has been removed from the union and we can get to work on replacing the hoses. Next up, I refitted the calipers back on the car because I wanted to see if I could push out the pistons using brake pressure alone. So once I reinstalled the hoses, I bled the system using this very fancy machine where you just hook it up to the top of the brake fluid reservoir, turn it on, and then it will force through brake fluid and top up as you bleed. So all you need to do is open the bleeding screw and drain it into a suitable container. With the brakes bled, I then pumped the brakes to see if I could push the pistons out. One of them did start coming out, so I used the brake pushback tool to push it back in and hold it in place whilst I pumped the brake to get the other piston to move. But as you can see, it wouldn't budge. Now the next step I would suggest would be to replace the calipers, whether you find them second hand or brand new, because refurbishing them, as you'll see in a minute, does require a lot of time and effort, and I think it's only possible if you do have compressed air. In the Caliper Refresh Kit, you get a bag of new rubber seals, 2 pistons, 2 bleed screws, and some red grease to put it all back together. After trying with a set of mole grips to pull the pistons out, I then moved on to the compressed air. And with a bit of persuasion from the mole grips, I was able to remove the piston. On the other side, it was a bit more tricky. To get the piston fully out, I had to wind it back in, applying some penetrating fluid to loosen it up. Then use compressed air to push it back out, and I was able to remove it this time. Now we can remove the outer dust seals, which were so perished and they had actually bonded to the surface of the metal. Then we need to remove the inner seals, taking care not to scratch the surface inside the caliper. Then we need to grease up the replacement seals in the kit provided before refitting them to the caliper. Then we can reinsert the pistons, and with a bit more grease, they should just slide back in. Then install the dust seals over the top, and using the edge of this pick, I push the edge of the seal back into the caliper, making sure that it was correctly mounted in the groove all the way around. Next we're replacing the bleed screws, which were so rounded off, I had to use some mole grips to get a purchase on them. with the new bleed screws in, we can move on to this rubber protective sleeve. Before moving on to these two rubber boots protecting the sliding bolt. It can be a bit tricky putting these on again, but it's better to fit the seal to the outside edge and then using the pick again to ease it onto the edge of the caliper. With all the seals fitted, we can now install the brake hoses again, tighten them up, and we're going to change the brake pads as well. This is some new hardwire that comes with the brake pads. Apply a bit of anti-squeal to the edge of each brake pad and install them in the carrier. Then remount the caliper. Install the securing bolt. Tighten up to the correct torque. And then we can reinstall the brake hoses. Then we can use that super duper machine again to bleed the brake lines. Before checking that it's all okay, by pumping the brakes and seeing if the disc will still spin. Happy that this side's now okay, I refit the wheel and the hubcap before moving onto the other side. Thanks for watching as always, and stay tuned for next week's video where I'm going to try and get the alternator running again so the car can charge its own battery again, and I announce what we're going to call the Project Volvo. If you are interested in supporting the project, please like the video, consider subscribing, and feel free to check out my Patreon.